It's another in my series of making lemonade from lemons. I thought, everything ready to go on my next weaving project. I had the loom completely ready, all warped, tied up, the whole 9 yards. And then I wove the header. And only then did I realize I had made a mistake in my color sequence. So I want to talk you through how I'm going to recover this from this mistake without redoing the whole kit and caboodle. So first, let's talk about what the problem was. And in fact, this wasn't the only mistake I made. Uh, so the color sequence on this project is a patch of solid turquoise zephyr, which is a wool silk blend, and then it's 4 ends each of light tencel and dark tencel. Let me zoom in so you can get a clearer sense of this. 4 ends each of light and dark, and then another patch of the zephyr. Then there's supposed to be 2 of this light gray color, and then 8 alternating light and dark tencel. And I don't know what on earth I was thinking when I wound these chains. Um, I wasn't paying attention, or I just, for whatever reason, I did it wrong. And in fact, when I put the opposite end around the apron bar of on the back of the loom for back to front weaving, I thought to myself, I'm not sure that I've got this color sequence right. But I didn't pay any more attention to it. I just went on ahead and warped the whole loom. So in warping from back to front on the back beam, let me move the camera so you can get a sense. I had a rattle, and it rough slayed my project uh, to equal the width of the weaving. So everything was separated into 1 inch chunks. And that meant to do that well or close to well, the correct color sequence had to be going around the apron bar at the back. And in fact, when we look at this more closely, we can see every place I made a mistake and then fixed it at the front of the loom. And I'm still a little trepidatious about this, but I think it's going to be okay. Okay, so remember that each wide patch, 8 ends each of light and dark blue tencel, is supposed to have this gray on either side of it. And so here's a mistake, and here's a mistake, and here's a mistake. So it looks like I was pretty consistent that I made these mistakes uh, throughout this whole warp chain, which was the wider of the 2 warp chains, um, and got this one pretty much right. Um, yeah, this one I got right. So because I've got the ends, one end of each warp chain on the back apron bar, the one that's attached to the warp beam, I do not want to try to slide these off and put my new chain of oh, and the big mistake I made on this second chain was that I missed an entire block of 8 alternating dark and light blue. So I've made a new chain just of those colors, and it's ready to go on the loom. But like I said, I don't want to slide all these off and try and put them on. So the weird thing I'm going to do is warp this new tiny chain from front to back, and I'm going to connect it at the back apron bar. I'm going to tie a big knot, and then I'm going to connect it to the back apron bar with one of these tie-up cords that I just loop around the back apron bar in a lark's head knot. But I've got a couple of steps I've got to do before that. So you can see here that, and remember, I had tied everything off on the front apron bar. I was ready to weave. I was rocking and rolling. Uh, I've untied everything from the front apron bar, but I've left it, I reslayed this section, leaving a gap for the new chain. I've reslayed this new section and made simple overhand knots because I'm going to add this new chain from front to back. And let's see how well we can see this here. I've added 16 repair heddles because that's string heddles. That's the number I need to complete this color sequence. And that meant tying 2 new heddles to each of my shafts. Originally, I was going to try something wacky, but in the end, it turned out that string heddles were the way to go. And there are a million, okay, I might be exaggerating. There are a lot of YouTube videos on how to tie string heddles. You can see them here. They're in just black. I think this is 5/2 cotton. You want a fairly thick cotton. You want something that's not going to stretch. And I have never tied this. I don't think I've ever tied this many repair heddles in one go. The important thing is that the little eyes for them, this is where the yarn's going to go, my warp yarn, have to be at pretty close to the same height as everybody else on this shaft, uh, so that when the shaft is lowered, everything is at the same low level. And when the shaft is raised, it's raised and you don't have an uneven shed where some yarns are way down here and others are way up here, because that's going to be really unpleasant to weave. So I tied, what I did was on each shaft, I started at the back since I was sitting at the front of the loom. I looped a long strand of yarn, made my bottom and top knots for the eye of the heddle, and then just let them hang. Then I supported my uh, one shaft at a time. Problem with an 8-shaft loom is you've got to add heddles to each of the shafts. So I just have this little box here, and I started at the back of the loom. I raised one shaft, shaft 8, and I put it on top of this box so that this box was sitting on the bottom heddle bar. And then I could more easily reach the top of the shaft to tie off the top of these loops. And then I just progressed my way forward. This turned out to be a pretty efficient way to do it. There are metal repair heddles you can buy, but they run, I'm going to say, $4.50 a piece. I didn't have any, and I would have needed 16 of them. So for speed and economy, I opted to do these string heddles. Why, you might ask, am I going to keep the, why have I got everything slayed in the reed? That is because what I've got to do next is unbeam the warp. So I've got my ratchet dog and my ratchet advance lever in a place where they are unlocked. And I'm just going to start pulling. I'm going to pull everything. Oh, and I have to set the brake release pedal under the brake release hold. So now I'm in a place where I can just start pulling all my warp chains. So I'm going to pull them all off until the back beam is revealed. And then I will pick up again and show you the next step. Okay, so I pulled my warp chains, and I may have made a terrible mistake because when you look at the back of the loom, when you look at what's happening at the rear apron bar, there is nothing to keep these ends in this place in relationship to each other. In other words, at the halfway point of that, so this is a warp chain that's 4.5 yards long. There's nothing to keep these little guys at that 4.5 yard mark, and you can see some of them are bunching up, etc. So my fix to get around that is to grab my can of ponytailers, and work from the knot that I had at the front coming out of the reed and just even everything out relatively. If it's half an inch off, that's not a big deal. But when it starts to become 3, 4 inches, then you're going to have problems. So I'm evening things out. And then about every 18 inches, I'm just going to put a choke tie on. And this, if you've ever wondered why you're supposed to put choke ties on your warp chains, this is why. So keep going, smooth everything out. And now, at least in theory, when I get to the end of this chain, or when I get to the heddles, I should not have huge discrepancies in my warp length the way I currently do. So I'm just going to keep doing this for a while. It's going to take a while.